Germany, April 1945. The war is breathing its last, but the stench of death still hangs heavy in the air. General George Patton's Third Army is tearing through the heart of the Reich, leaving behind shattered steel and the broken pride of the Wehrmacht. But there are some things that even tank divisions cannot crush. That is human depravity. When Patton stepped across the threshold of a field hospital on the outskirts of Airfort, he expected to see the pain of his boys. Instead, he witnessed a scene that didn't just violate the manual, it denied the very concept of humanity. A German officer, a lieutenant colonel whose name history tried to erase, was caught in the act with an American Red Cross nurse. This wasn't romance. This wasn't passion. It was an act of pure aggression and the humiliation of a woman who had just been bandaging the wounds of his own soldiers. Patton stopped. Those nearby recalled that at that moment, time seemed to freeze. The air became thick, like lead. You are watching a story about how one general decided that conventions must sometimes give way to true, primal justice. Within 30 seconds of this confrontation, Patton already knew this officer would not see the sunset. But the way he handled it will make you hold your breath. Did Patton go too far that day? Or was this the only language understood by an enemy who had lost his human face? While you think about that, subscribe to the channel to never miss the truth about the war they don't teach in schools. It is up to you to decide whether he was a hero or a tyrant. Let's dive into the details of this audacity. A Red Cross hospital is holy ground on the battlefield. Here, weapons are supposed to be silent. Here, enemies become simply patients. But this officer, raised on the ideology of supremacy, felt nothing but contempt. His scorn for the American medics was evident from his first day in captivity. He demanded special rations. He demanded to be addressed by his rank while his own soldiers rotted in the neighboring wards. But that morning, his arrogance crossed all lines. The nurse, a very young girl who had left her home in Virginia to save lives, became the object of his sick need for dominance. He cornered her in the sterilization room. This was not just an assault, it was a violation. A spit in the face of the warrior's code. He believed that since he was a prisoner of war under the protection of international law, the Americans would not dare touch him. He stood there, adjusting his tunic, with a smile that read as certainty of impunity. He thought the bureaucracy of war would save him, but he failed to account for one factor: the fury of a man who hated Nazism more than death itself. Do you believe that someone who violates the sanctity of medical personnel deserves the status of a prisoner of war? Should the law protect those who have trampled it themselves? Write your opinion right now. It is vital for our discussion. When the hospital doors swung open, it felt as if a hurricane had rushed inside. Patton didn't just walk, he advanced. The ivory-handled revolvers gleamed on his belt, but he didn't need a weapon. His presence alone was enough to paralyze everyone within a 10-meter radius. The atmosphere before the explosion was almost physically palpable. Those standing nearby later described it as the state before a massive thunderstorm. You could hear the creak of his leather gloves as he slowly removed them, never taking his eyes off the German officer. Patton didn't scream. That was the most terrifying part. His icy gaze pierced through the Nazi. The general stepped so close that the German could smell the cigar smoke and Patton's cologne. At that moment, the German tried to speak about his rights. He began to quote articles of the Geneva Convention in broken English. Patton listened for only 3 seconds. Then he took another step closer, and the German fell silent. This was a cold fury, the state in which Patton was most dangerous. He didn't see an officer in front of him. He saw filth that needed to be purged. Friends, I want you to put yourselves in the general's shoes. Before you is a man who has just committed a loathsome crime, and he is laughing in your face, hiding behind the very laws he despises. What would you do in that second? Would you hold back from pulling the trigger, or would you find another way to punish the guilty? Hit the like button if you believe justice should be immediate. The resolution was as harsh as the war itself, but this time, Patton decided to strike at what Nazi officers valued above all else, their false, hollow sense of honor. Patton had no intention of wasting time on paper tribunals that would drag on for months in rear echelon offices, where lawyers would argue over footnotes while the blood of his men was still fresh on the floor. He knew that justice delayed is justice denied. He ordered 2 soldiers from his personal guard, battle-hardened men who had seen the horrors of the camps, to take the lieutenant colonel to the backyard of the hospital. There, under the cold, biting April rain that mixed with the gray dust of a shattered Germany, Patton delivered his verdict. The silence was absolute, broken only by the rhythmic dripping of water from the hospital's eaves. Patton approached the officer point blank, his eyes 2 burning coals of righteous fury. This wasn't just a violation of rules, it was a violation of the soul of a soldier. The general's words didn't just ring out, they cut through the air like a whip. Instead of ordering him to be shot, which Patton felt would have been an honorable soldier's death he no longer deserved, the general ordered the officer to strip. Right there, in front of everyone, the lieutenant colonel was forced to remove his tailored tunic, to tear off every medal he had earned for bravery, and to rip the insignia of rank from his shoulders. Patton personally took the German's iron cross, looked at it with pure disgust, and threw it into the thick, freezing mud. Then, he stepped on it with his heavy, polished cavalry boot, grinding it into the filth until it disappeared. But that was only the beginning of the nightmare for the master race representative. Patton ordered the guards to fetch a mop and a bucket of lye. He forced the Nazi, under the intense, silent gaze of the wounded Americans, who were brought to the windows to witness the scene, to scrub every single inch of the hospital floor. This man, who an hour ago thought he was a god, was now on his hands and knees, washing the grime and blood off the boots of American private soldiers. Patton stood over him the entire time, his presence a crushing weight. Every time the officer's hands shook or he tried to look away in shame, a guard's rifle butt reminded him of his new reality. Patton had stripped him of his humanity because the officer had discarded his own the moment he touched that nurse. When the back-breaking work was finally finished, the officer wasn't sent to a comfortable camp for high-ranking prisoners. Patton personally signed a special directive, transferring him to a labor detail meant for the lowest common criminals, where he would spend the rest of the war rebuilding the very infrastructure his regime had destroyed. This was a retribution that didn't just break bones. It systematically dismantled the man's ego until there was nothing left but a shell. Why was this episode buried in the classified archives for 80 long years? The answer is simple: political fear. The high command in Washington was terrified of Patton's field justice. They saw a dangerous precedent that ignored the Geneva Convention's special privileges for the officer class. To the bureaucrats, it was a legal disaster. No, to George Patton, the honor of a nurse and the dignity of his wounded men weighed far more than any paragraph in a rulebook. This incident became a whispered legend throughout the Third Army. It sent a message louder than any artillery barrage. Their commander wasn't just a strategist. He was their shield. He believed the title of officer was a burden of responsibility, not a license for depravity. This changed the war's final weeks. When German units realized they were facing Patton, their officers knew that aristocratic respect wouldn't protect them if they had committed atrocities. The fear of Patton's personal retribution became a more effective deterrent than any formal court-martial. Patton showed the world a hard truth. If you act like a beast, you forfeit the right to be treated like a man. He stripped away the veneer of military professionalism to reveal the criminal underneath. This is why Patton remains the most polarizing figure in history, a warrior who ruled by a code of tooth and claw. The debate remains fierce. Was Patton's justice a necessary act of moral clarity in a world gone mad? Or was it a dangerous slide toward the very barbarism he claimed to fight? This question has divided historians for generations, and now it divides us. If you were standing in that yard, seeing the trauma of that nurse and the smug face of the man who caused it, would you have stayed your hand? Or would you have demanded the same cold justice that Patton delivered? Your voice is part of this history. Tell me in the comments, was he right, or did he go too far? Make sure you are subscribed to War POV with Mike. Hit the bell, because the stories we uncover are the ones they wanted forgotten. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the comments.
I'd love to hear what you think. Leave your opinion in the comments.